think he didn't help himself to the people who disliked him to begin with. It's one of those. He's a guy who, for whatever reason, is a lightning rod, and he sort of has this group that defends him at all costs, and another group that likes to pick at every flaw in his game, in his personality. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. I agree with a lot of things he said. You do want somebody to take losses hard. Certainly if you're a fan of a particular team, the last thing you want to see is somebody who doesn't care. And certainly after a game at that level, we always talk about the jersey trades. You see the difference in the NBA with the guys hugging and they're all friends after the court. And fans kind of look at that and say, hey, I'm invested in this. How come you're not invested in it? And Cam took the loss hard, and that's one side of the coin. The other side is you're the quarterback of an NFL team. You're the face of the franchise. You're supposed to act in a professional manner, and being a professional after a loss doesn't necessarily mean you're a guy who doesn't take a loss hard. It doesn't necessarily compute in that direction. So from that standpoint, I don't agree with Cam, but I understand what he was trying to say.
He said, quote, I'm on record as being a sore loser. I hate losing. You show me a good loser, and I'll show you a loser, is basically what he said. So that was from Cam Newton today. He also said he did not want to risk injury jumping for that football, John. I can squarely say that answer is unacceptable.
Yeah, that I agree with you. I mean, that's the Super Bowl. That's ridiculous. You got to stick your head in there. You got to try to get that football because, that in essence is the game right there. They're probably not going to come back and win anyway, but you got to do everything humanly possible to try to get that fumble back. And that part of it's not acceptable. The part of not accepting losing well, I don't have an issue with that. But that's not mutually exclusive to being a professional. Just because you're not going to see many quarterbacks, and I talk about Russell Wilson, who had it much tougher the year prior. Remember, I don't think there's ever been a quarterback who has lost the Super Bowl in that fashion, throwing an interception on the goal line in the final seconds of the game. That's the worst possible scenario for any quarterback. He went up there and acted professionally. And believe me, he wasn't happy about the loss.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. This kind of got swept under the rug because we were, off on the weekend and the Super Bowl on Monday, but the Hall of Fame class for 2016, I don't understand how Owens is not in and Harrison's in.
Oh, I understand that. I mean, if you see the way the voters have done things over the years and the fact that if you look at receivers in the past, Chris Carter, one of the recent ones, would be a good example. He had to wait a number of years. And there's this whole mentality that you can't put in two receivers in 1 year. It can only be one at a time. So Marvin is before Terrell. He's been waiting longer. So it was his time to get in. He's an unquestioned Hall of Famer as far as a player, one of the great route runners of all time. And he had been waiting longer, so to me it made perfect sense knowing how they do things and how they think. T.O.'s eventually going to get in the Hall of Fame. It might take a little bit longer than most expect simply because of his off-the-field troubles. Some of the voters take that kind of stuff very seriously, and the fact that he moved from franchise to franchise to franchise despite being a star player, that's going to hurt him in some people's minds. But there's no doubt eventually he's going to be in Canton.
John McMullen's with us, 97.3 ESPN.com. All right, the ballot for next year is interesting, John. You cover the league nationally. You have for a long time. I want to throw some of the higher-profile names at you and get your reaction. We did it last hour. I think Pete and I found three definites in this list and a couple of borderline guys. Dawkins, where do you feel Dawkins?
I think he is a borderline guy. I know Philadelphia Eagles fans are not going to be happy about that. But, again, if you look at the history of the Pro Football Hall of Fame, if you look at what they've done, there are not a lot of safeties in the Hall of Fame. There just isn't. And the guys who are in there are just unbelievable. The credentials jump off the page. Another example, Paul Krause, who a lot of people don't know that name, but he's the all-time interception leader. He had to wait over a decade to get in the Hall of Fame. If Brian Dawkins gets in, it's going to be a while, so strap in. Because people think he's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. It's just not going to happen.
All right, a couple other ones that I found interesting. We just talked receiver. Chad Johnson, Derek Mason, Hines Ward. I say no on all three.
No, none of those have any shot whatsoever. You talk about, some of the Andre Reed just recently. How long did he have to wait? We just talked about Chris Carter. You're going to see guys coming up. You have T.O. on, who's in the system, so to speak, now, and eventually he's going to get in. Randy Moss is going to be popping up. These are all-time great receivers, and those were very, very good players. But it's not a Hall of Very Good. It's a Hall of Fame. Those guys are never getting a chance.
All right, some running backs here. Tomlinson is in, right? No doubt.
Correct.
Larry
No doubt.
Larry Johnson, Ricky Williams, and Thomas Jones. I got no on all three.
Yeah, you're right. No shot. Not only no shot for any of those three.
Thomas Jones is borderline. I mean, he's over 10,000 yards, but he's a compiler.
Yeah, he is. Now, he's not even borderline. Again, very good player, but it's very difficult to get into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and it should be. I mean, it's only the best of the best, and when you talk about guys like that, I had a question about Curtis Martin, if he would ever get in the Hall of Fame, and that's the level you have to be at to be a potential Hall of Famer. A guy like Kenny Easley, who was, we talked about safeties, we talked about Brian Dawkins. Kenny Easley was one of the best safeties I've ever seen play the game of football. Not in the Hall of Fame, probably never getting in the Hall of Fame. It's very, very, very difficult, and especially at a position like wide receiver where you have so many good candidates, and then you start getting into the conversations, the numbers are spiked because of the era we're in, and people take it that way. And then if you look at this most recent class, Mike, Ken Stabler just passed away, finally gets in the Hall of Fame from the Veterans Committee. It took him that long, and that just, again, exemplifies how difficult it is to get the vote to get in.
John McMullen's with us. Now, I don't know the criteria or what people look for offensive linemen. You cover the league. You might have some more insight on both Olin Kreutz and who is the tackle, Matt Light from the Patriots. I don't know that any of them jump off, but I would say, without really knowing what they look for, Light played on those New England teams, and a lot of times if you're associated with a great run and you're a key part of that, that is a big help.
Yeah, it can be, but a guy like that, you have to be an offensive lineman. Really, the thing they lean most heavily on is all pro bids, not Pro Bowl, but all pro. When you're regarded as one of the generally best 2 or 3 players at your position, multiple, since guys like Orlando Pace won in this year, Walter Jones recently. You're talking about 7, 8-time all-pro level people. Those are the kind of guys they look at that want to put in the Hall of Fame. Guys like Matt Light, I would compare him to just a great complementary player on an NBA team. And that could be great. A Robert Horry getting you championship after championship after championship. But when it comes down to being rated as a Hall of Famer, they're really not in the conversation.
All right, a couple other ones here. Let's see. Jason Taylor, definitely in. I would say he was another one. I gave him a definite.
I would not say definite, but he's got a very good chance. And one of the reasons why is there's probably, besides quarterback, there is no other position more valued by the Hall of Fame voters than pass rushers. And you kind of saw it again. Kevin Green in this class, I didn't think he was a Hall of Famer. They put him in because he's basically third or fourth, I forget, on the all-time sack list. Now, remember, that's a relatively new statistic, so it doesn't date back to the days of great pass rushers like Deacon Jones or Carl Eller or people like that. But they love pass rushers, and Jason Taylor was great at rushing the passer. So I would say he's got a very, very good chance to get in.
A couple others I think on the outside. Joey Porter at linebacker. Bob Sanders. Now, Sanders is unfortunate, because he was injured, so I would say he's definitively out because of those injuries. And Tommy Harris, the defensive tackle from the Bears.
Yeah, those aren't legit candidates. You're right about Bob Sanders. He had a very, very short run, and really he was probably the MVP of that Colts team that won the Super Bowl. He was so good that season. But he had such a small shelf life. And, think about a guy like Terrell Davis, who was so dominant as a running back, but it was a very short shelf life. And one of the big aspects they look at is longevity. So it's very difficult. You have to be a tremendously dominant player for, say, over a 4 or 5 year period to even get noticed. And Sanders doesn't even reach that criteria. So I think he's not in the conversation. Those other guys, Tommy Harris, certainly not.
Nope.
They're just not at that level.
Last two interesting guys. Shockey. Now, he's a 4-time Pro Bowler, first-team All-Pro. Tight end is an interesting spot. 37 touchdowns. Kind of came in with a bang and kind of fizzled out.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. The longevity, again, is not there. Very good player for a short period of time. We talk about there are guys who can pile, and then there are guys who can pile at a high level consistently. Shockey, unfortunately, didn't play at that high level for a long enough period of time. So as good as he was for a 2-3 year span, he's not going to be in much of the conversation for the Hall of Fame voters. But he was a tremendous player for that brief period.
All right, here we go. The polarizing guy is McNabb. Is he I don't think he's first ballot, but is McNabb in?
It's interesting. I put Randall Cunningham in this category, too, and I think the fact that, in a weird way, Tony Dungy got into the Hall of Fame this year, I think it helps their chances, simply for the reason I think if you add in what they meant to the game as far as changing the position, changing the view of the position, helping African Americans in the game of football, I think their case becomes much stronger. If you look at it from a purely football perspective, I don't think Randall Cunningham's a Hall of Famer. I think Donovan is a borderline Hall of Famer, probably trending more towards not getting in because he never did win the Super Bowl. If he did get that one Super Bowl, I think we're having a different conversation. But again, I think Tony Dungy and the fact that he got in helps them because a lot of people cited the fact that Dungy was much more than a coach. The things he did off the field, the things he did to help African Americans in the game of football, and they sort of added that on top of his resume as a coach, and that's what got him into Canton. I think that could change the thinking for players like both Randall Cunningham and Donovan McNabb.
I think he'll be interesting. He will be he's right there. He's right there on the borderline. His numbers are right on the edge. I mean, he's got better numbers than a lot of Hall of Famers. Kelly and Aikman. He's got better numbers than some guys that are in there, but they might have accomplished. Aikman's got the Super Bowls. Kelly went to 4, so he is going to be an interesting. I think he will be the most interesting name on next year's ballot.
Yeah, I agree. I certainly don't think he's going to be a first ballot.
Me neither.
I tend, and I think numbers aren't as important in football as, say, baseball when you talk about Hall of Famers because the eras are so different. You bring up a Ken Stabler. His numbers, if you look at them compared to today's quarterbacks, are awful. But the bottom line is the guy won a ton of games. He won Super Bowls. He won MVPs. It was a different game. So you have to judge players in their specific era. And I think Donovan's right there either way. I think he's a borderline candidate as a player. I certainly would have helped if they won the Super Bowl over New England. I think that would have sort of gotten him over the top, but that's not where we are. So he's going to have a difficult time getting in, and it might be a similar situation to a Ken Stabler. You might be waiting 10, 20 years. You might be going to the veterans group before he does eventually get in. But I think the opportunity for him to do so is very legitimate.
John McMullen's with us, 97.3 ESPN.com. And, John, I guess, get your update on this LaShawn McCoy stuff. The news is not good for him. They got arrest warrants sought out in his case. The arrest warrants are now imminent for him. Is LaShawn McCoy in some hot water here? I mean, do you think there's a possibility that he could be in more trouble than typically we think these star athletes get into when something like this happens?
Well, I mean, he's in significant trouble. There's no doubt about that, But as far as if we're talking significant jail time, I don't think that's on the table. I certainly think he's going to be arrested. He's going to be charged. And any time in that situation, we all know the NFL has sort of cracked down when it comes to not only domestic violence, but incidents like this. I think you're going to see a possible suspension. But we've all seen what they are also, and it's probably only going to be 1 or 2 games. So while I think it's a significant headache, certainly for him, certainly from a legal standpoint, and the Buffalo Bills aren't going to be happy with it, and a lot of people in Chip Kelly's camp are probably smiling and saying, look, we told you so. And that's part of it, and there's no question, and he needs to clean up some of this stuff. And athletes as a whole have to understand, if you saw sort of the Zapruder-type film breakdown from Crossing Broad of the security tape with LaShawn McCoy, they have to understand they're under a microscope. This is not the same as it was in the 60s and 70s when Joe Namath could go out drinking and Mickey Mantle. These guys have to understand this. We're in a different world. Everybody's got a camera phone. Everybody's got surveillance video. You can't be a high-profile athlete and put yourself in these types of situations.
All right, John McMullen, I'll leave you with Fletcher Cox. There's some reports, $50 million in guaranteed right around that area there. Is that the deal that you're presenting them and feeling good about?
Yeah, I mean, that's the realization of the market. If anything, that would be a team-friendly deal. And I said if there's one guy who should play this out, it's Fletcher Cox, because if he has a big year under Jim Schwartz, and I think he's going to, that number's only going to grow. It's only going to get higher and higher. So while people look at that and shake their head, the realization is somebody's going to give Fletcher Cox that money. So if it's not the Eagles, it's going to be somebody else. And I don't think anybody wants to lose them. How close they are to a deal, you've been hearing for about 2 weeks that the Eagles are working towards it. And I think that's the mentality is they want. We've seen it already with Howie Roseman time after time after time. He wants to target the players that he thinks are the core of this team and get team-friendly long-term deals done. The most difficult, we've said it time and time again on this show, is going to be Fletcher Cox because he's above and beyond the Zach Ertz. As good as he is, as good as Lane Johnson, as good as players like that are, Fletcher's in a different category, and he's going to get significant money, and you're seeing that sort of develop as we get either closer to this deal or closer to Fletcher saying, hey, I'm just going to take my chances the season under Jim Schwartz and see if I could get even more money.
All right, we'll keep an eye on Fletcher Cox. Obviously, the Eagles want to get this done before he gets to free agency. and he could get a big deal. All right, John McMullen with more on the Eagles over at 97.3 ESPN.com at JF McMullen for all of his National Football League coverage. John, we'll talk to you tomorrow.
Hey, thanks, Mike.
97.3 ESPN.